Hello everybody and welcome back to the Maniacal Mini. Today is the start of my Maggotkin of Nurgle painting series. This first episode is going to be here on YouTube. The first and second episode will be available on my Patreon for the Patreon subscribers. This is going to be more of a masterclass series, so we're going to be going over everything from speed painting all the way up to much higher detailed and intricate styles of painting as we develop a little further into the series. We're going to be focusing a lot more on layering, more than we will focus on, speed painting like we would in the beginning. So I'm going to start out now with this awesome texture paints that Green Stuff World was kind enough to send me. This is the Dark Earth texture. It's really, really nice. I have a really big thing for texture paints, especially ones for dioramas and scenes like that. So this one definitely holds up to my standards. Just make sure we're going to get it all the way to the edge, just so we can create a nice uniform look as we move into the Middle Earth texture. As you can see, I'm kind of stippling it on here, mixing it in, trying to blend the tones of the two Earth textures together. It's really just going to be a light amount. We don't want to fully cover up all that dark earth underneath. We want it to look pretty natural and uniform. The one thing I want to say to keep in mind is to kind of flatten out. The reason I'm using the flathead brush, I'm going to kind of flatten this out a little bit just so it looks a little more natural. When I attach the miniature to it, I won't have to put too much extra and kind of screw up this awesome thing that we got going on with the tones. So we're going to move right into the Green Stuff World Light Earth texture. This one's more of an orangey texture. I liked it because it almost simulates like a freshly churned earth. It looked really, really cool. So I'm going to go into that and just slightly blending the two of those together, and we will pick it up right there in just a second. Moving on to some AK Interactive Swamp Gel. As you can see with my flathead brush, I'm kind of just evening it up against the surface of the texture paints that we put down a little earlier. I want this to have a nice even look, kind of like it's, slightly splashing up against the sides of the earth patch that we put down. I put my Rotbringer Sorcerer on there just to give a good view of how it is going to look when it's situated and finished. As you can see, I'm just cleaning it up a little bit here. Don't be afraid to do that. It's super easy to clean up. The reason I do that too is because once I start painting the base later, I don't want these really chunky pieces to be hanging off the base, so I clean those up a little bit as I go along. But as you can see, I'm just putting on some random patches, leaving some areas a little higher than others. I know it looks a little bit cartoonish, but once it dries, it'll start to get this really deep dark green, kind of a dirtyish kind of green. I'm just fixing it up here. As you see, I got a little bit on the skulls here, so I'm just going to clean that up, and we will move on to the next step in just a minute. So I'm going to move into painting our skulls that are on the base. These are going to be a pretty high standard, so I'm going to move in on the palette now. I got Rhinox Hide, Steel Legion Drab, XV88, Xandri Dust, and Morghast Bone. The first thing I'm going to do is start out with that Rhinox Hide over a black primer. I'm going to be using multiple thin coats to build up that undertone of Rhinox Hide, and then we're going to be combining a bunch of glazes pretty much to add the subsequent highlights, and that's going to build a really smooth transition. And you can absolutely just use the black undertone and completely skip this step. In my experience though, this is a much more realistic breakdown of the multiple tones that bones can get. So we're going to do a few coats of this, and then we're just going to pick it up in the next step. So moving into our 50-50 mix of Rhinox Hide and Steel Legion Drab, I thinned this down with a good amount of water. We're going to move it down to a glaze consistency. That way we can have something that's a little bit easier to control and work with. It's also because we don't want to fully cover up all our hard work that we're doing in our previous steps. The amount of layering that we're doing, we want that tone to be visible as we go up towards the highlight layers. So as we do that, I'm going to be being extra careful where I'm placing my brush strokes, leaving as much paint as I can at the highlight source and, moving it towards the shadow layers so that it's less of the glaze that's going over our work that we did in the previous steps as we go along. But it's also going to give it a more natural look. You're not going to notice where it would be more of a visible shift in tones. You're not really going to notice that as much as we do this. Just make sure you're keeping your paint moving. Keep your brush strokes in the same direction so that it looks even and consistent. You don't want to leave sloppy brush strokes all over the place because nobody wants to see that. So we're going to pick it up now in just another step. Okay, so I have added a little bit more Steel Legion Drab to our mix. This is going to bring it down to purely Steel Legion Drab. We're going to add a little bit more water, bring it back to that glaze consistency that we were working with. The key here is to just keep that brush control. Make sure you don't overload your brush. This will fill in a lot of the recesses that we definitely don't want to be filled in. Keep this in mind, especially as we move into later steps, because having to almost redo your work as you go along definitely gets a little bit frustrating. So, just always leave enough of the previous layer showing so that our transitions are noticeable, but also smooth. Okay, so adding a little bit of XV88 to our mix of Steel Legion Drab, adding a little bit more water. If anybody is curious as to what the consistency is of the paint that I'm working with, you could see on the glove that I just showed you, as towards the opacity of, just what we're working with as far as glazes. You can see that they're pretty see-through. We're just working up in very, very, very smooth layers. So we just want to keep our brush strokes to maintain that even and smooth transition. So just make sure that you're still working in the same direction, keeping things nice and smooth, nice and light with those glazes. We can actually start to work in a little bit of stippling at this stage to kind of start to ease the transition between the tones without creating one that is too jarring for people to look at. So if you're confused on what stippling is, we're just going to take a little bit. We're just going to actually kind of dot almost where that transition layer would be of the paint that we're trying to put down to the layer that we just had before that. So it's just very light touching of the tip of the brush to kind of create these little dots that will smooth out because it's a glaze, and it won't look very, unnatural as the tones go. Okay, so I added in a little bit of Xandri dust to that mix. So you should have about 75% Xandri dust to 25% XV88 at this point. Thin it down with some water if you need to bring it back down to that glaze consistency. We're going to start focusing though on the upmost highlights. These are the ones that are really just kind of, picture the sun above it. If they were just beating down, those would be the upmost highlights wherever that sun would be hitting on that bone. So we're going to move into this, keeping it nice and light again, really, really thin down to that glaze. Be really careful where you're placing your brush strokes. I'm going to be sticking more to stippling at this point than I am to almost full brush strokes because I'm starting to cover such a smaller area, I don't need to use those full brush strokes anymore. So I'm switching back and forth right now between the stippling and kind of sketching it on there with that glaze, but we're going to pick it up in another second. Okay, so I went ahead and mixed in about a 50% mix of Morghast bone to our previous mixture of the Sandry Dust and XV88. I thinned it down with a little bit more water to get it back down to the glaze. And now I'm just going to really stick to stippling on the most extreme highlighted areas. So, you know, those are the ridges above the eyes, the cheekbones, the nose and the mouth ridge, the topmost part of the skull. As you see, I'm very lightly sketching. At the most, no full brush strokes, just very, very light. We're going to pick it back up with one more highlight step in just a minute, so I'll leave you guys here to hang out. Okay, so now I'm going to be taking pure Morghast bone. That's going to be thinned down again to a glaze, but this is just going to be the absolute most extreme points of the ridges, so we're not going to be coating everything that we just coated before. Fix it if you have to. I kind of just messed up a little bit there, but we're going to keep on trucking with it. So yeah, this is just for the upmost extreme ridges and highlights, and we are going to be done with our highlighting step after this. We're just going to be painting the rim of the base and adding a few more things, and we will wrap it up after that. So black is the typical base rim color. I just want to tie this all in, keeping in the spirit of those nice dirty browns. I'm going to bring back in that Steel Legion drab to do the rim. You might need a couple coats around it, but just take your time, go in nice layers, build it up so it comes out nice and smooth. And for my final step here, I'm just going to be adding this awesome little tuft that Green Stuff World also sent me. I know it seems like a weird color on there. I just thought the vibrancy of it kind of added to this, you know, mystical swamp. You know, you never know what kind of dirty, gross, you know, weird colored things are going to grow there. But we will be, like I said, working on this series going into our Patreon page. So if you are not a Patreon supporter yet, please consider supporting me on Patreon so we can continue to bring these awesome videos to you guys. If you are not a subscriber of the YouTube channel yet, please consider doing that and leaving a like so that we can continue to bring you plenty of videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. I had a great time painting these guys. I'm really looking forward to this whole series. Got some really cool ideas, so happy painting, and we will see you in the next video.